picture the Andes Mountains in Colombia. In this specific region, there's this extended family that has lived with well, basically a pretty devastating genetic curse for generations.
Yeah, it's a very specific mutation, a PSEN2 variant,
Yeah,
and it is just merciless.
right. Like, for anyone in this family who carries it, early onset Alzheimer's disease is considered basically an absolute certainty.
Oh, yeah. They start showing really severe cognitive decline in their 40s.
In their 40s, and then by their 50s, the disease has usually, completely taken over.
Exactly. It's a tragic, very predictable timeline.
But recently, researchers discovered this one man in this family who defied literally everything we thought we knew about genetic destiny.
It's an incredible case.
Right, because he carried the deadly mutation. His brain was scanned, and I mean, it was completely full of the physical plaques associated with the disease.
Full of them.
Yet this man was passing cognitive and memory tests with flying colors well into his late 60s.
Yeah, he lived over a decade longer than medical science said was even possible, and with a fully intact, sharp mind.
Which is just, it's wild. How does a brain riddled with the biological markers of a disease just simply refuse to succumb to it?
Well, I mean, it is one of the most profound mysteries in modern neurology right now.
Yeah.
And the answer to how he did it, it fundamentally changed the entire landscape of how we view aging.
Because we used to look at family history as this, inescapable script.
Right. But the case of this Colombian man proves that the script can actually be rewritten at the biological level.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive. If you are over 50, you have likely had a moment where you paused in the middle of a sentence, grasping for a word you know perfectly well.
Oh, everyone has that moment.
Or you walked into a room and just completely forgot why you were there. And in that tiny fraction of a second, this very specific fear creeps in. You wonder, is this it? Is my mind starting to slip?
Yeah, that cold flash of panic. It's very common.
Totally. So today is entirely dedicated to you and to dismantling that fear with actual rigorous science. We are cutting through the doom scrolling, the sensationalized headlines, all of it, to really focus on empowerment.
Because the reality of brain health right now, in 2026, it is overwhelmingly hopeful. It really is.
It is. Our mission here is to break down the latest research simply and equip you with a really concrete, evidence-based toolkit, what you can actually do, starting literally today, to protect your mind.
And, the foundation we are building on today is massive. We're pulling directly from the 2025 National Institutes of Health, Alzheimer's Disease, and Related Dementias Research Progress Report.
Which is a mouthful, but it's the gold standard.
It is. And we're cross-referencing that with the Alzheimer's Association's 2025 Facts and Figures Report, the clinical guidelines from AARP's Global Council on Brain Health, and extensive dietary reviews from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health.
So we're really looking at the cutting edge of global scientific consensus here.
Exactly. We're moving far beyond just, the basic definitions of dementia. We're looking directly at the microscopic machinery of your brain.
And more importantly, how you can actually take control of the levers that operate it. But to take control of those levers, we have to understand how the machinery actually breaks down in the first place.
Right.
And going through these sources, I was really struck by how the medical community is sort of moving away from treating cognitive decline as this vague, inevitable fog that rolls in with age.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They view it as a highly specific sequence of biological events.
Yeah. And there's this specific analogy in the literature that I think clarifies this perfectly. It's the trigger and the bullet.
Yes. That analogy is brilliant for understanding the pathophysiology simply. It really isolates the two main proteins that researchers focus on.
Beta amyloid and tau.
Exactly. So when we look at a healthy brain, it's constantly clearing out metabolic waste.
Like taking out the trash.
Right. But in Alzheimer's disease, this protein called beta amyloid stops being cleared away effectively. These sticky fragments begin to accumulate in the microscopic spaces between your neurons.
And they clump together into what we call amyloid plaques, right?
Yes. And you can think of these plaques as the trigger. They initiate a cascade of problems, creating this environment of heavy inflammation and cellular stress.
Okay, so the amyloid is just sitting outside the brain cell, sort of causing a toxic environment. But the amyloid itself isn't what instantly destroys your memory.
No, the amyloid just pulls the trigger.
Wow, okay, so the actual fatal damage, the bullet that happens inside the cell.
Precisely. And the bullet is a completely different protein called tau.
Okay, break that down for us. What is tau doing?
Well, in a healthy neuron, tau is essential. Neurons have this internal transport system, sort of like Microscopic railroad tracks.
Okay, railroad tracks.
Yeah, and they carry nutrients and essential molecules from the main body of the cell down its long branching arms. Normal tau proteins act like the wooden ties holding those railroad tracks together.
Oh, so they keep the tracks straight and stable.
Exactly.
Uh,
But when that amyloid trigger is pulled and the environment becomes toxic and inflamed, the tau proteins undergo a chemical change. They become hyperphosphorylated.
Hyperphosphorylate is meaning they basically detach from the tracks.
Right, they detach and they begin to clump together inside the cell, forming these twisted, rigid structures called neurofibrillary tangles.
And once those tracks collapse, the neuron effectively starves to death, right? It can't transport nutrients, it can't communicate with the neuron next to it, and the cell dies.
That's exactly it. And when millions of these cells die in the hippocampus, which is the memory center of the brain, that is when you experience the actual cognitive decline.
You forget the name, you forget the face.
Yeah. And understanding that sequential mechanism, the trigger outside the cell causing the bullet inside the cell, it shatters one of the most pervasive and dangerous myths about aging.
That it's just normal to lose your mind as you get older.
Exactly. The NIH report spends a significant amount of time emphasizing this point. Dementia is absolutely not a normal part of the aging process.
It's a specific disease pathway.
Right. And the most crucial piece of data we have right now is the timeline of that pathway. Because the accumulation of the amyloid trigger and the subsequent twisting of the tau bullet, it begins a decade, sometimes 2 decades, before a person ever experiences a single symptom.
Wait, a 20-year silent window.
Yes, a decade or more.
That completely reframes the panic. I mean, when you lose your keys at 55, your brain is not at the end of a rapid decline. You are in this massive, prolonged window of opportunity where the biological processes are happening, but the permanent damage hasn't manifested yet.
You have time to intervene. A lot of time.
That is so huge. But I have to voice the skepticism that I know a lot of listeners are feeling right now, because it goes back to that Colombian man.
Ah, the genetics question.
Exactly. Because if my grandfather had dementia and my mother had dementia, I'm just going to assume I have the genetic markers. If the trigger is hardwired into my DNA, how is a lifestyle intervention going to stop a genetic certainty? I mean, isn't the game just rigged from birth?
It is a very rational fear, but the genetic science tells a remarkably different story. I mean, let's look at the actual numbers here.
Okay, let's hear them.
There's a gene that regulates cholesterol metabolism in the brain called APOE. We all inherit 2 copies of the APOE gene, one from each parent. And there are different variants or alleles.
And there's one specific variant that gets all the terrifying press, right?
Yes, the APOE epsilon 4 variant, or APOE4. It is undeniable that APOE4 is a major risk factor. If you inherit 1 copy, your risk increases.
And if you get 2 copies?
If you inherit 2 copies of APOE4, statistics show you have roughly a 60% chance of developing Alzheimer's by the age of 85.
Wow. I mean, a 60% chance sounds like a death sentence to anyone reading their genetic testing results online.
It sounds devastating, yeah, until you look at the inverse of that statistic.
What do you mean?
A 60% chance means that 40% of the people walking around with the absolute highest, most dangerous genetic risk profile for late-onset Alzheimer's never develop the disease.
Oh, wow. 40%.
Yes. 4 out of 10 people with a loaded genetic gun never have the trigger pulled.
That is a huge reframe.
And furthermore, the early-onset Alzheimer's that is purely undeniably determined by genetics, the kind driven by mutations in genes like PSEN1 or PSEN2 that we saw in Colombia.
The ones that stray people in their 40s.
Right. That accounts for only 1 to 2% of all cases globally.
So for 98% of the population, genetics are an influence, not a guarantee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Genetics load the gun, but environment, lifestyle, and overall metabolic health pull the trigger. And the science of genetics is no longer just about discovering what makes us sick.
What else is it doing?
It is actively discovering what makes us invincible. Which brings us back to the Colombian man.
Right. The guy who should have gotten sick but didn't.
Yes, he had the PSEN2 mutation. He was in that rare 1 to 2% where the disease is supposed to be an absolute certainty.
So why didn't his neurons starve? Like, why didn't his internal railroad tracks collapse?
Because when researchers sequenced his entire genome, they discovered an incredibly rare mutation. He possessed a variant called the APOE3 Christchurch mutation.
Okay, the Christchurch variant, what does that do?
Well, remember how the amyloid trigger causes the tau bullet to form?
Yes, the outside causes the inside to tangle.
Right. The APOE3 Christchurch variant seems to act as a biological blast shield between the two.
A blast shield.
Yeah. His brain produced the amyloid plaques. The trigger was pulled. But the Christchurch variant altered the way his brain cells communicated with each other. It disrupted a specific signaling pathway, preventing the toxic environment from signaling the tau proteins to twist and tangle.
So the bullets were never formed.
Exactly. His genetic armor blocked the disease from progressing to the fatal stage. And researchers are finding other protective variants too, like APOE2, which actively helps clear amyloid out of the brain faster than normal.
I find that incredibly hopeful. I mean, honestly, we cannot change your DNA today. We can't just go to a clinic and inject ourselves with the APOE3 Christchurch variant.
Not yet.
Right, not yet. But if the biological mechanisms of this disease can be stalled or blocked or circumvented entirely, if the trigger can be prevented from firing the bullet, we need to know what behavioral levers we can pull to mimic that protection.
We need to know what actually changes the environment of the brain.
Exactly. And that requires us to look at the most empowering large-scale clinical trial in the recent literature. Let's dive deep into the U.S. Pointer study.
The Pointer study is incredible. It's really the gold standard for answering the question, does any of this lifestyle advice actually work in the real world?
Because for a long time, doctors would just tell patients to, eat right and exercise.
Yeah.
But the data was mostly observational, right?
Exactly. People who already lived healthy lives tended to get less dementia. But the Pointer study, which stands for the U.S. Study to Protect Brain Health through Lifestyle Intervention to Reduce Risk, it was a randomized clinical trial. It was designed to test lifestyle as a rigorous medical intervention.
And they didn't just study marathon runners or people who had been eating organic kale since the 1980s.
No. And that is what makes the data so relevant. They enrolled over 2,000 adults in their 60s and 70s who were specifically identified as being at high risk for cognitive decline.
We're talking about everyday Americans here.
Yes. Many of them had a lifetime of poor dietary habits. They were dealing with central obesity, prediabetes, high blood pressure, and they were largely sedentary.
So their baseline metabolic health was basically poor, creating the exact inflammatory environment that encourages amyloid and tau accumulation.
Precisely. And they divided these thousands of participants into two groups. The control group received standard self-guided health education.
So basically pamphlets and general advice to try to be healthier.
Right. But the intervention group went through a highly structured, intense, multi-domain lifestyle change program.
And it wasn't just joining a gym, right? It was a comprehensive overhaul of how they lived.
The multi-domain aspect is critical because the brain does not respond to a single magic bullet. The intervention group engaged in a tightly monitored regimen.
What did that actually look like day to day?
Well, they had to achieve specific weekly goals for aerobic exercise. They had to rigorously follow a specific nutritional plan, which we'll detail shortly. They engaged in structured computer-based cognitive training designed to push their neuroplasticity.
Wow, so physical and mental.
Yes, and mandatory socialization components to combat isolation. And finally, they had aggressive, closely monitored medical management of their cardiovascular risk factors, keeping strict control over blood pressure and cholesterol.
I mean, that sounds exhausting, frankly. It sounds like a full-time job.
It was a massive commitment.
But the results, when I read the outcome data, I actually had to read it twice to make sure I was interpreting it correctly.
The results justify every ounce of effort.
Seriously. Because after 2 years of this regimen, the participants in the structured intervention group didn't just, slow down the trajectory of their cognitive decline. They took cognitive tests measuring memory, processing speed, and executive function.
And they performed at a level comparable to adults 1 to 2 years younger than their actual chronological age.
Younger. They didn't just stop the clock. They actively reversed their cognitive aging.
It is a stunning outcome. And what the researchers found particularly fascinating was the subgroup analysis.
What did they find there?
The individuals who entered the study with the most vulnerabilities, the people who carry the APOE4 risk gene, or the people who already showed early, subtle signs of biological tau accumulation.
The highest risk group.
Yeah, they actually seem to derive the greatest cognitive benefit from the intervention.
Wait, really?
Yes. The worse off their baseline genetic and biological risk, the harder the lifestyle intervention seemed to fight back.
That is just... It's the ultimate clinical proof that it is quite literally never too late to intervene.
Never too late.
I am obsessed with the specific story of Phyllis Jones from this trial. Do you remember her case?
Oh, absolutely. She represents exactly what so many people feel.
Right. She was 66 years old when she entered the study. And she was dealing with severe depression. She was diagnosed with prediabetes, and she described this profound, frightening sluggishness in her mind.
Yeah, she had started a new job and found herself completely unable to keep up with the pace of her younger colleagues.
The group chats, the rapid-fire emails, the quick decision-making, she felt like she was wading through molasses.
And her baseline state was basically a perfect storm of cognitive risk. I mean, depression alters brain chemistry. Prediabetes damages the microvascular system feeding the brain. And the chronic stress of feeling inadequate at work just floods the brain with cortisol.
But she committed to the structured intervention, and over the course of the study, she lost 30 pounds. She entirely reversed her prediabetes like her blood sugar returned to normal, healthy levels.
But the most profound change was neurological.
Yes, she reported that the mental fog simply evaporated. Her processing speed returned. She was suddenly able to fire off emails, track complex projects, keep up with the youngest people in her office. She told researchers, "I hardly recognize myself."
It's an amazing transformation.
But I want to know, from a mechanical perspective, what actually happened inside her skull over those 2 years. Because a positive attitude doesn't clear amyloid plaques. What was the biological mechanism of her recovery?
Well, the biological mechanisms triggered by a multi-domain lifestyle intervention are vastly more complex than just, burning calories.
hmm
The researchers discovered profound physiological ripple effects.
Like what? Give me an example.
Let's look at sleep architecture, for example.
Yeah.
The Pointer study lifestyle changes fundamentally altered how the participants' brains cycled through sleep stages.
How does a lifestyle change alter the structure of sleep?
Many participants, particularly those carrying excess weight, suffer from sleep apnea.
Right, where they stop breathing.
Yeah, they stop breathing dozens or hundreds of times an hour, and this causes microarousals. You don't fully wake up, but your brain is violently yanked out of deep, slow-wave sleep.
So you're never really resting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Through weight loss and exercise, participants significantly reduce this sleep fragmentation. And this is vital because of a newly discovered system in the brain called the glymphatic system.
The glymphatic system. Sounds like the lymphatic system, but for the brain.
That's exactly it. The lymphatic system clears waste from your body. The glymphatic system clears waste from your brain. But here's the catch. It is only highly active during deep, uninterrupted slow-wave sleep.
Oh, I see.
During deep sleep, your brain cells literally shrink slightly, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to rush through the brain tissue, washing away the metabolic waste accumulated during the day.
Including the beta amyloid proteins. The trigger.
Yes. By fixing their sleep architecture, the Pointer participants were essentially turning on the pressure washer in their brains every single night, clearing out the trigger before it could accumulate into plaques.
That is fascinating.
Furthermore, the aggressive management of their cardiovascular health improved the elasticity of their blood vessels, ensuring that every time their heart beat, a steady, perfectly regulated pulse of oxygen and nutrients reached the deepest regions of their brain without causing microscopic damage.
So by fixing the body, they fixed the environment the brain relies on to survive. And the absolute cornerstone of fixing that environment, the foundation of the Pointer study's success, was the nutritional intervention. I mean, we cannot talk about cognitive longevity without talking about the raw materials you use to build your cells.
Nutrition is paramount.
Right, so I want to spend a significant amount of time breaking down the specific dietary protocol that the global scientific community has really rallied behind. Let's look closely at the MIND diet.
The MIND diet represents the absolute zenith of nutritional neuroscience right now. It was developed by researchers at Rush University Medical Center and Harvard.
And MIND ends an acronym, right?
Yes, it stands for the Mediterranean DSH Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. It's a highly specific hybrid. It takes the proven anti-inflammatory, heart-healthy fats of the Mediterranean diet and combines them with the specific blood pressure-lowering mechanics of the DSH diet.
Before we get into the food itself, we need to clarify the DSH diet, because I hear that acronym constantly, but the mechanical function is rarely explained. What is DSH doing?
D- stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It was designed specifically to combat high blood pressure without medication.
Okay, and mechanically, how does it do that?
It works by heavily restricting sodium, which pulls water into your blood vessels and increases pressure, while simultaneously maximizing the intake of potassium, calcium, and magnesium.
So it's about the minerals.
Potassium is the key player here. It actively relaxes the walls of your blood vessels, easing the tension and lowering the shear force of blood pumping into delicate organs like the brain.
And the mind diet takes that vascular protection and layers on neuroprotective nutrients.
Exactly.
Shay, let's make this incredibly practical. Imagine you, the listener, are walking into a grocery store right now. What goes into the cart? What is the strict do-eat list? And more importantly, why?
The guidelines are unambiguous. At the very top of the list, you must consume 6 or more servings of leafy green vegetables every single week.
6 servings. So we're talking spinach, kale?
Swiss chard, collard greens, yes. You also need 2 or more servings of berries every week, with the research specifically isolating blueberries as the most intensely neuroprotective.
Blueberries specifically. Got it. What else?
You should be incorporating nuts, beans and legumes, poultry and fish. And your absolute primary source of cooking, fat replacing everything else, must be extra virgin olive oil.
Okay, I need to challenge the specificity here, because if I'm trying to be healthy, an apple is healthy, carrots are healthy, bananas are healthy, why are spinach and blueberries given superstar status over every other fruit and vegetable when it comes to the brain? Like, what is the microscopic chemistry happening there?
It comes down to the unique vulnerabilities of brain tissue. Your brain is a metabolic furnace. I mean, it accounts for only 2% of your body weight, but it demands 20% of your body's entire energy and oxygen supply.
That's a lot of fuel for a small organ.
Right. And because it is burning so much fuel so rapidly, it produces a massive amount of metabolic exhaust. In biology, we call this exhaust oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress, meaning free radicals.
Yes. Free radicals are unstable oxygen molecules that lack an electron, so they violently bounce around, stealing electrons from your healthy cell membranes, damaging your DNA, and causing cellular degradation.
Ouch.
Yeah, and the brain is also highly susceptible to chronic low-grade inflammation, which is the exact environment that causes tau proteins to tangle.
So the brain is constantly on fire and producing toxic exhaust just by doing its job.
Exactly. And this is where the specific chemistry of leafy greens and berries comes into play. Leafy greens are densely packed with the specific trifecta: folate, vitamin E, and carotenoids.
Okay, and the berries?
Berries, particularly the dark pigments in blueberries and blackberries, contain massive concentrations of anthocyanins and flavonoids. These compounds are essentially a microscopic cleanup crew.
A cleanup crew that actually gets to the brain.
Yes, they're capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier, and once inside the brain, they act as powerful antioxidants. They willingly donate electrons to those unstable free radicals, neutralizing them before they can tear holes in your neurons. They actively switch off the genetic pathways that promote inflammation. When you eat a bowl of blueberries, you are literally delivering chemical fire extinguishers directly to your hippocampus.
That is an amazing image.
An apple is wonderful for your digestion, sure, but it simply does not possess the specific chemical payload required to cross the blood-brain barrier and put out neuroinflammation.
That drastically changes how I look at the produce aisle. It's not just about calories, it's about delivering specific chemical payloads. Now, let's look at the olive oil requirement. Why must it be the primary fat?
Extra virgin olive oil is astonishingly protective. It is rich in monounsaturated fats, specifically oleic acid, which helps maintain the structural integrity of the myelin sheath.
The myelin sheath, that's the insulation around the nerves, right?
Right, the protective insulation wrapping around your neurons that allows electrical signals to travel at high speeds. But the real magic is in its polyphenols, specifically a compound called oleocanthal.
Oleocanthal, what does that do?
Oleocanthal has been shown in laboratory studies to physically alter the structure of the toxic amyloid proteins, making them less sticky and easier for the brain's lymphatic system to wash away.
Less sticky, so it literally stops the plaques from forming. Okay, so that is the do-eat list, the defensive arsenal. What is the limit list? And I appreciate that the AARP and Harvard guidelines use the word limit rather than demanding total elimination, which makes it actually, sustainable.
Sustainability is key. The diet fails if it requires monastic perfection.
Exactly.
So the items you need to strictly limit are red meat, butter and stick margarine, cheese, sweets and pastries, and any fast or fried foods.
Let's pick on cheese for a second, because, it's universally loved. Why is cheese on the limit list for brain health? How does a slice of cheddar impact my memory?
It comes down to the mechanics of saturated fats and the integrity of the blood-brain barrier.
Okay, the mesh that protects the brain.
Right. The blood-brain barrier is a highly selective, tightly woven mesh of cells that protects the brain from toxins in the bloodstream. A diet exceedingly high in saturated fats, like those found in cheese, butter, and marbled red meat, has been shown to increase systemic inflammation.
And that inflammation attacks the barrier.
Yes, over time, chronic systemic inflammation degrades the tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier. It becomes leaky.
Leaky brain.
Leaky brain. And when the barrier becomes leaky, inflammatory proteins from the rest of your body can cross over into the brain, accelerating the toxic environment that triggers Alzheimer's pathology.
That is terrifying.
Furthermore, excess saturated fats contribute to the formation of cholesterol-rich lipid rafts on the membranes of your brain cells.
Lipid rafts.
Yeah, and these lipid rafts are the exact locations where the toxic beta-amyloid proteins prefer to anchor themselves and clump together. By limiting saturated fat, you are denying the disease the scaffolding it needs to build plaques.
Wow. Okay, no more giant cheese boards. The clinical results of adhering to this chemistry, though, are just staggering.
The numbers are incredible.
Yeah, the observational data coming out of Rush University, they tracked older adults over years, meticulously logging their diets. And they found that individuals who showed strict adherence to the MIND diet reduced their rate of developing Alzheimer's disease by 53%.
More than half.
You cut your risk in half just by changing your grocery list. And the most comforting statistic for the average person is that even moderate adherence, like just doing your best to lean into these rules without being perfect, still resulted in a 35% reduction in risk.
And we now have the physical autopsies to
Yeah.
prove it isn't just a statistical fluke.
Really, autopsies on the MIND diet.
Yes. In 2023, researchers published findings from examining the brains of individuals who had been tracked in these dietary studies and had died at an average age of 91.
So they looked at their physical brains.
They physically examined the brain tissue under a microscope. The 91-year-old who had consistently followed the MIND diet had significantly fewer physical amyloid plaques and tau tangles compared to those who ate a standard Western diet.
So the nutrition didn't just, mask the symptoms. It actively prevented the physical decay of the organ itself over decades.
That's exactly right.
Now, whenever we talk about acquiring these massive doses of vitamins and antioxidants, we hit a massive cultural roadblock. And I am talking about the supplement industry.
Oh, yes. The supplements.
Because if a listener goes online right now and searches for brain health, they will be relentlessly targeted by advertisements for expensive pills, extracts of rare jellyfish, obscure jungle roots, proprietary blends of brain fuel.
They are everywhere.
And they cost $60 to $100 a bottle. And the marketing copy implies they will sharpen your memory overnight and dissolve brain fog instantly.
This is an area where the AARP's Global Council on Brain Health is intensely vocal and utterly unambiguous.
What do they say?
They explicitly warn the public to avoid the trap of these expensive, heavily marketed brain health supplements.
So it's a trap.
The vast, overwhelming majority of these products lack any rigorous independent clinical trials proving their efficacy. They are categorized as dietary supplements, which means they are largely unregulated by the FDA in terms of proving they actually work before they hit the shelves.
Wow.
At best, they are a phenomenal waste of money. At worst, their concentrated herbal ingredients can interact dangerously with prescription medications you are already taking for blood pressure or cholesterol.
Right.
There is absolutely no pill, powder, or extract that can replace the systemic, complex biological benefits of a diet rich in leafy greens and monounsaturated fats. The biology simply doesn't work that way.
I am so glad we are being definitive about that. Save your money, folks. But looking deeply into the recent clinical updates, there's a fascinating nuance that emerged just in the last 2 years. The $60 magic brain pill is a scam. But the science points to something surprisingly cheap and ubiquitous that actually does work.
Yes, this was a surprising finding. While the exotic brain supplements failed, researchers looked at the most basic intervention possible: a standard, over-the-counter, inexpensive daily multivitamin.
Like the ones you buy at the grocery store for $10.
Exactly. The Cosmos trials, the Cocoa Supplement and Multivitamin Outcome Study, published massive findings in 2022 and 2023. They tracked thousands of older adults for 3 years. Half took a placebo, half took a basic daily multivitamin that cost pennies a day.
And the multivitamin group actually showed a statistically significant improvement.
They did. Compared to the placebo group, the adults taking the daily multivitamin demonstrated clear improvements in global cognition, episodic memory.
Episodic memory is your ability to recall specific recent events, right?
Right. And they saw improvements in executive function,
I am struggling to understand the logic there. How does a cheap, generic multivitamin succeed where a targeted high-tech brain supplement fails? Like, what is the mechanism?
It comes down to fixing foundational deficiencies rather than trying to supercharge the brain with exotic chemicals.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, because the aging body becomes less efficient at absorbing nutrients from food. Even if you are eating well, you might be deficient in specific
For
micronutrients.
example.
For example, B vitamins, specifically B6, B12, and folate. They are required enzyme cofactors. Your brain literally cannot synthesize essential neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine without them.
So if you're low on B vitamins, your brain just can't make the chemicals it needs to think.
Exactly. Furthermore, deficiencies in B vitamins lead to high levels of an amino acid called homocysteine in the blood, which is highly toxic to the blood vessels in the brain.
Wow.
A daily multivitamin doesn't provide a magic cure. It acts as an insurance policy. It quietly fills in the microscopic nutritional gaps, lowers homocysteine levels, and ensures the basic chemical machinery of the brain has the raw materials it needs to operate smoothly.
So the takeaway is ignore the flashy internet ads, but talk to your doctor about adding a generic multivitamin to your morning routine to act as nutritional safety net.
Perfectly said.
Now, we have spent a lot of time talking about feeding the brain, but having the right nutrients in your bloodstream is entirely useless if those nutrients cannot physically reach the deep tissues of your brain.
Yes, the delivery system is crucial.
You have to physically fuel the organ using the cardiovascular system. This seamlessly links the chemistry of the diet to the physical plumbing of the body. So let's look at the body-brain connection.
The current focus in neurology right now is VCID, vascular contributions to cognitive impairment and dementia.
Which means,
Well, we tend to view the heart and the brain as two separate systems. The cardiologist handles the chest, the neurologist handles the head. But the brain contains an estimated 400 miles of microscopic blood vessels
400 miles inside the skull.
inside your skull, and this intricate, incredibly delicate plumbing network is solely responsible for delivering oxygen and washing away the metabolic waste we discussed earlier.
Right, the lymphatic system.
Yes. So if your heart is struggling to pump efficiently, or if those 400 miles of vessels become stiff, calcified, or damaged, the brain tissue at the end of the line starves.
And the sources emphasize that this vascular damage doesn't have to be like a massive catastrophic stroke that lands you in the emergency room.
Exactly. The insidious threat is the subcortical infarct.
Okay, subcortical infarct, what is that?
These are tiny, silent mini-strokes occurring deep within the white matter of the brain. You don't feel them happening. Your face doesn't droop. Your speech doesn't slur.
You have no idea it's happening.
None. But every time a microscopic vessel bursts or blocks, a pinprick of brain tissue dies. The AIRP guidelines note that accumulating these silent vascular lesions can increase your overall risk of developing clinical dementia fourfold. It accelerates everything.
Fourfold. So protecting the plumbing is arguably just as important as protecting the neurons. How do we protect 400 miles of delicate vessels? The answer lies in what I think is one of the most important clinical trials of the decade, the Sprint Mind trial.
Yes. The Sprint Mind trial was a monumental undertaking involving over 8,000 older adults with high blood pressure.
Now, historically, doctors were somewhat lenient with blood pressure in older patients, right? Thinking a little elevation was a natural part of aging, perhaps aiming for a top number, the systolic pressure, around 140.
Right, but the researchers wanted to see what would happen to the brain if they aggressively pushed that number much lower.
And they found a magic number.
They did. The trial proved that keeping systolic blood pressure strictly below 120 millimeters of mercury, not at 130, not at over 40, but below 120 yielded profound neurological protection.
Below 120.
Yes. The group that aggressively maintained their blood pressure below 120 saw a significant reduction in the development of mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor stage to full dementia.
Let's visualize the mechanism of why that top number matters so much. You mentioned white matter earlier. How does blood pressure physically damage white matter?
Let's use an analogy. Imagine the white matter of your brain as a vast network of delicate fiber optic cables connecting different regions of the brain, allowing them to communicate instantly.
Okay.
The microscopic blood vessels weave right alongside these cables. When your systolic blood pressure is high, say 140 or 150, every single time your heart beats, it is acting like a high-powered pressure washer, blasting blood into those delicate vessels.
Ouch.
Yeah, and over years, millions of high-pressure blasts cause the walls of the vessels to stiffen, leak, and inflame the surrounding tissue. This inflammation damages the fiber optic cables, the protective coating on the cables phrase, creating what radiologists call white matter lesions.
So the signals short circuit.
Exactly. When you aggressively treat your blood pressure to get it below 120, you are turning that violent pressure washer back into a gentle, steady garden hose.
Wow, pressure washer to garden hose. That makes perfect sense.
The vessels heal, the inflammation subsides, and the fiber optic cables are protected. MRI scans from the Sprint Mind trial physically proved that the below 120 group dramatically slowed the accumulation of these white matter lesions.
So keeping your blood pressure under 120 is non-negotiable for brain health. Diet plays a massive role in that, particularly the DIOH components we discussed. But the other massive lever we can pull is physical movement.
Yes.
But I want to be very precise here because the literature is very precise. We aren't just talking about lifting weights to maintain muscle mass.
Right. Resistance training is wonderful for preventing frailty, but when it comes to the neurobiology of the brain, aerobic exercise is the true medicine.
Okay, so getting the heart rate up.
We are talking about activities that elevate your heart rate and keep it elevated for sustained periods. Brisk walking, cycling, swimming, jogging.
What exactly is happening in the brain when I go for a 30-minute brisk walk?
Multiple mechanisms activate simultaneously. First, the mechanical aspect. An elevated heart rate forces a massive surge of oxygen-rich blood through that 400-mile vascular network, forcing the vessels to expand and contract, keeping them elastic and healthy.
So it's exercising the plumbing itself.
Yes, but more importantly, aerobic exercise triggers a biochemical cascade. When your muscles are engaged in sustained aerobic output, they signal the brain to produce a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
BDNF. I've heard researchers refer to it as miracle grow for the brain.
That is exactly how it functions. BDNF actively promotes the survival of existing neurons, but crucially, it stimulates neurogenesis, the actual birth and growth of brand new neurons in the hippocampus.
Wait, actual new neurons? I thought we stopped growing those.
We don't. Aerobic exercise has been shown in MRI studies to physically increase the volume, the actual physical size, of the hippocampus, directly counteracting the shrinkage associated with aging.
That is incredible.
It specifically enhances what we call executive function, which is the brain's ability to plan, organize, focus, and multitask.
Now, there is a truly fascinating innovation mentioned in the NIH report regarding exercise. We all know Tai Chi. It involves slow, deliberate movements, and it is universally recommended for older adults to improve balance and reduce stress.
Yes, it's wonderful.
But researchers wanted to push the boundaries, so they tested something called cognitively enriched Tai Chi.
This is a brilliant example of dual-tasking neuroplasticity.
Okay, explain that.
Well, standard Tai Chi is wonderful, but once you memorize the physical forms, your brain essentially goes on autopilot. It stops being a cognitive challenge.
Right.
In the cognitively enriched version, the instructors added dynamic mental puzzles and memory challenges that the participants had to solve while they were flowing through the physical movements.
They forced the participants to spell words backward or solve math problems while maintaining their physical balance and form. It's like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, but dialed up to a neurological extreme.
Exactly. And the biological premise is profound. By engaging in aerobic or complex physical movement, you are flooding the brain with oxygen and triggering the release that BDNF, the miracle grow.
So the brain is fertilized and ready to grow.
Yes. The brain is primed and highly receptive to building new connections. By introducing complex mental puzzles at that exact moment, you are forcing the brain to immediately utilize that primed state to forge new synaptic pathways.
And it worked.
The results of the study show that this cognitively enriched Tai Chi was vastly superior to standard Tai Chi in improving global cognition for older adults who are already showing signs of mild cognitive impairment.
So it suggests that if you want to maximize your exercise, don't just zone out on the treadmill, listen to a complex educational deep dive, or actively try to memorize something while your heart rate is up.
Combine the physical fuel with the mental spark.
Exactly.
Now, while we're on the topic of the physical body impacting the brain, I need to bring up a seemingly unrelated issue that absolutely blew my mind when reviewing the AARP guidelines: hearing loss.
When I read that, I was genuinely confused. I mean, what do the mechanical workings of my inner ear have to do with the accumulation of toxic amyloid plaques deep in my cortex?
It is an incredibly counterintuitive connection, but it is currently recognized as one of the single most modifiable, overlooked risk factors for dementia globally.
So it's not that a broken eardrum somehow causes proteins to misfold.
No. The danger of hearing loss lies in the concept of cognitive load and the reallocation of cortical real estate.
Okay, explain the cognitive load mechanism. How does bad hearing exhaust the brain?
Think of your brain's processing power as a finite resource, much like the RAM in a computer. When you have healthy hearing, sound enters the ear, is cleanly converted into electrical signals, and the auditory cortex decodes those words effortlessly. It takes very little processing power.
Right, it just happens automatically.
But if you have uncorrected hearing loss, the inner ear sends degraded, garbled, incomplete electrical signals to the brain. If you are sitting in a noisy restaurant trying to listen to your spouse, your brain is receiving static.
So the brain has to work harder just to figure out if the person said cat or hat.
Exactly. To decipher that static, the brain is forced to recruit massive amounts of computing power from other regions. It steals resources away from the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for short-term memory, executive function, and forming new ideas.
Wow.
Your brain is working so frantically just to decode the consonants that it literally has no processing power left over to actually store the information into your memory banks.
That is a revelation. So when someone with hearing loss forgets what was said in a conversation, it's not because the memory center is damaged by Alzheimer's. They forget because the memory center was starved of resources by the auditory cortex.
Precisely. And over years, this constant, exhausting state of high cognitive load physically alters the structure of the brain. The brain operates on a use it or lose it principle.
So if you aren't using the memory center because you're spending all your energy just trying to hear,
If the areas responsible for higher level thinking are constantly suppressed to aid in hearing, those areas begin to atrophy. Furthermore, the sheer exhaustion of trying to hear leads to the most dangerous secondary effect: behavioral withdrawal.
because it's too much work to talk to people.
Yes. When going to a restaurant or a family gathering becomes an exhausting, frustrating chore, people stop going. They begin to decline invitations. They isolate themselves. And as we will discuss, profound social isolation is a massive, independent biological trigger for cognitive decline.
But the clinical fix for this complex neurological cascade is unbelievably simple and actionable.
It really is. The ACHIEVE trial, a landmark study published recently, looked at older adults at high risk for dementia who had untreated hearing loss. They simply fitted half the group with proper, modern hearing aids and provided audiology counseling.
And what happened?
The results showed that for the high-risk group, actively using hearing aids reduced the rate of long-term cognitive decline by nearly half over a 3-year period.
Nearly half. By giving them hearing aids, the researchers instantly reduced the cognitive load. They gave the brain its processing power back.
They did.
That is one of the most empowering statistics in the entire body of literature. If you are listening to this right now and you find yourself constantly asking people to repeat themselves, or turning the television up to uncomfortable levels, or avoiding crowded rooms because it's too hard to follow the conversation, consider this your absolute, scientifically validated sign to go get your hearing checked.
Absolutely.
Getting a hearing aid is not a concession to getting older. It is an aggressive, vital medical intervention to preserve the structural integrity of your brain.
Beautifully said.
Speaking of avoiding crowded rooms, that transitions us seamlessly into the next massive pillar of the toolkit. We've established how to feed the brain and how to protect its blood supply and sensory inputs. But keeping the organ physically alive is only half the equation. You have to keep the network engaged. Let's explore how to actually exercise the mind and the absolute necessity of community.
Yes. The term neuroplasticity is thrown around a lot. It is the brain's ability to reorganize itself, to form new neural connections throughout life. To trigger neuroplasticity, you have to engage in cognitive training.
But we have to be incredibly careful about defining what actually constitutes training.
We do. And the benchmark study here is the active clinical trial.
What did the active trial do differently than the standard advice to, do a crossword puzzle?
The active trial didn't use generic puzzles. They employed highly specific, targeted cognitive interventions. They trained participants in 3 distinct areas: episodic memory, inductive reasoning.
Inductive reasoning, which is solving complex problems by identifying patterns, right?
Exactly. And processing speed. They pushed the participants to their mental limits. And the longitudinal data is astounding. The researchers followed up with the participants 10 years after the specific training had ended.
Wait, 10 years later?
Yes. A decade later, the individuals who received the targeted training in reasoning and processing speed still demonstrated significantly better cognitive performance in those specific areas compared to the control group.
After a decade.
Furthermore, they reported significantly less difficulty in performing the complex activities of daily living, like managing finances or preparing meals. The training built durable neural pathways that lasted a decade.
This brings me to a major point of contention I have with the modern brain health industry. I want to look at the explosion of commercial brain training apps you download on your phone. Because I look at these apps the exact same way I look at junk food.
That is a provocative analogy. Why junk food?
Because junk food is engineered to be highly palatable, easy to consume, and it comes in flashy packaging. The marketers might even slap a label on a gummy bear saying made with real fruit juice to trick your brain into thinking it's healthy, but it lacks actual complex nutritional substance. These commercial brain apps are brightly colored, they offer dopamine hits with bells and scores, and they market themselves as a medical intervention for your memory. But the sources, particularly the AARP guidelines, are very clear. Playing a matching game on your phone while you sit on the couch doesn't actually translate to real-world cognitive resilience.
Your analogy is biologically accurate. The failure of these apps comes down to the mechanics of learning. The brain is an incredibly efficient, energy-saving machine.
Meaning it's lazy.
Exactly. When you start playing a new game on your phone, your brain works hard for the first few days to learn the rules. But very quickly, it masters the specific pattern. It stops building new neural pathways and simply relies on a small, highly efficient, well-worn circuit.
Oh, I see.
You will get exceptionally good at matching the color squares or remembering the sequence of flashing lights on that specific screen. But that narrow, repetitive circuit does not translate outward. Getting a high score on a phone app does not build the complex, multi-regional neural networks required to remember where you parked your car or how to navigate a difficult conversation.
So what does build those complex networks? If the app is junk food, what is the cognitive equivalent of a massive, nutrient-dense salad?
To force widespread synaptogenesis, the creation of dense new connections across multiple regions of the brain, you must engage in activities that are genuinely novel and highly complex. The classic rule in neuroscience is Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together.
So you want an activity.
Yes. You want an activity that forces your motor cortex, your auditory processing center, your memory, and your executive function to all fire simultaneously.
Give me real-world examples. What does that look like?
Learning a new, complex language. This requires auditory processing to hear the new sounds, memory to recall vocabulary, and motor control to physically alter the shape of your mouth to produce foreign pronunciations.
Wow, yeah, that is multi-regional.
Taking up a complex musical instrument like the piano or violin. Learning a highly intricate form of dance like salsa or tango, which combines spatial awareness, physical balance, musical timing, and memory of the steps.
So it's basically anything that is incredibly hard.
These activities are frustrating and exhausting precisely because they are forcing millions of dormant neurons to suddenly fire and wire together. That struggle, that feeling of your brain hurting because it's so hard.
That's the feeling of it working.
Exactly. That is the exact feeling of neuroplasticity occurring. You're building cognitive reserve.
I love that. The frustration is the medicine. And you mentioned dance, which is perfect because you can't really salsa dance alone in your living room. It requires another person. It requires community. And the data linking social interaction to biological brain health is absolutely profound.
The NIH and AARP sources dedicate massive sections to this. We must stop viewing loneliness as purely a psychological state of sadness.
What is it biologically?
Loneliness is a severe, chronic physiological stressor. The biological data is unequivocal. Profound social isolation and chronic loneliness are direct, independent risk factors for the development of clinical dementia, including both Alzheimer's and vascular dementia.
What is the biological bridge between feeling lonely and developing physical plaques in the brain?
It centers on the endocrine system, specifically the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which controls your body's stress response. Human beings are biologically wired as social animals. Being isolated signals to the primal parts of your brain that you are vulnerable and in danger.
Like you're going to be eaten by a predator.
Exactly. This triggers a chronic, low-grade fight-or-flight response. Your adrenal glands constantly pump cortisol, the primary stress hormone, into your bloodstream. Over short periods, cortisol is helpful. But chronic, unrelenting cortisol exposure is highly toxic to the hippocampus.
It actually poisons the brain.
It actively causes the memory center of the brain to atrophy and shrink. Furthermore, chronic stress triggers systemic inflammation throughout the entire body, which, as we discussed with the My Diet, degrades the blood-brain barrier and creates the exact environment where amyloid plaques thrive.
That makes perfect biological sense, and it completely recontextualized a fascinating section of the research for me regarding personality traits. I mean, I'd never considered my actual personality to be a medical risk factor, but the studies show a massive correlation.
Yes, the longitudinal studies on personality and cognitive trajectory are incredibly compelling. Researchers have consistently found that highly neurotic individuals, and in clinical terms, neuroticism means a chronic tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety, anger, fear, and guilt, have a significantly higher risk of developing dementia.
Because they are constantly stressed.
The constant internal churning of anxiety keeps that cortisol tap running wide open for decades. The chronic psychological distress physically manufactures the biological biomarkers of Alzheimer's in midlife adults.
The anxiety literally eats the brain.
It creates the environment for the disease to flourish. But the reverse is equally powerful. The studies show that conscientious, highly extroverted individuals, people who actively seek out social engagement, who regularly experience positive emotions like joy, interest, and alertness, demonstrate a robustly lower risk of cognitive decline.
Why does extroversion protect the brain?
Because strong social networks act as an impenetrable buffer against stress. When a highly social person experiences a life stressor, they call a friend, they vent, they receive empathy, and their cortisol levels rapidly plummet back to baseline. The toxic exposure is minimized.
So they don't marinate in the stress.
Right. Furthermore, engaging in complex social interaction, navigating a dinner party conversation, reading facial expressions, empathizing with a story is one of the most cognitively demanding tasks a human brain can perform. It is a constant dynamic workout for your executive function.
So, making a deliberate point to call a friend, to volunteer at a local charity, to join a club, to actively manage your anxiety through therapy or meditation, these are not like soft, feel-good suggestions. They are rigorous, biologically necessary medical interventions for the structural integrity of your brain.
Absolutely.
Now, we have covered an immense toolkit so far. We know how to change the dietary chemistry. We know how to protect the cardiovascular plumbing. We know how to reduce the cognitive load with hearing aids. And we know how to force neuroplasticity through complex challenges in community.
A lot of tools.
But despite doing everything perfectly, despite building the ultimate lifestyle, biology is complex. What happens if you or someone you deeply love still starts exhibiting the signs? What if the keys aren't just lost, but you find them in the refrigerator and have absolutely no idea what they were used for?
Yes, the diagnostic reality.
I want to look closely at the completely revolutionized landscape of detection and treatment, because in the last 5 years, this field has moved from basically science fiction into everyday clinical reality.
The landscape has fundamentally transformed, and it begins with a massive societal paradigm shift in how we view the disease. For decades, there was a deeply ingrained fatalism surrounding Alzheimer's.
Oh, totally. The prevailing sentiment was always, I do not want to know.
Exactly. If I have it, there is no cure, so why put myself through the agony of an early diagnosis? Ignorance is bliss.
I remember that era so clearly. And Alzheimer's diagnosis felt like nothing more than a prolonged, hopeless waiting game.
But the 2025 Alzheimer's Association survey reveals that this fatalism has collapsed. Nearly 4 in 5 Americans now definitively state that they want to know as early as possible if they are developing the disease.
People want to know.
The desire for early diagnosis is overwhelming. And critically, 92% of individuals say they would actively want to take medication to slow the disease progression. The public is ready to fight.
And the reason they are ready to fight is that science is finally giving them weapons. And those weapons start with the diagnostics. The way we actually detect the disease has leaped forward. It used to be that the absolute only way to definitively confirm Alzheimer's was a postmortem autopsy. Or, if the patient was alive, you had to endure an incredibly invasive, painful lumbar puncture, a spinal tap to draw cerebrospinal fluid, or you had to undergo a wildly expensive PET scan that insurance almost never covered.
The barrier to entry for diagnosis was insurmountable for most people.
But now we are looking at revolutionary blood tests.
The blood tests are the dawn of a new era. The NIH report heavily highlights commercial breakthroughs developed with NIH funding, like the Percivity AD2 blood test. This is not a theoretical concept in a lab. This is actively being rolled out in primary care doctors' offices across the country right now.
I need to know how this works mechanically. How does a simple needle in my arm tell you what is happening deep inside my skull? What exactly is the mass spectrometer looking for?
It is looking for the microscopic residue of our trigger and bullet. The technology is incredibly sensitive. The test measures the precise ratio of specific biomarkers floating in the plasma of your blood.
What are the biomarkers?
It measures plasma A beta, the amyloid trigger protein that has crossed the blood-brain barrier into the bloodstream. And crucially, it measures a highly specific phosphorylated form of the tau protein called p-tau217.
The bullet.
Yes. P-tau217 is essentially the smoking gun. It correlates almost perfectly with the formation of the deadly tangles inside the brain. By analyzing the ratio of these specific proteins in a simple blood draw, the PrecivityAD2 test can predict a clinical diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease with an accuracy rate of 88 to 92%.
That is the exact same accuracy rate as the painful spinal tap or the $10,000 PET scan achieved with a standard blood draw during a routine physical.
Exactly. It democratizes early diagnosis. It allows doctors to detect the specific biological pathology years before the cognitive symptoms become severe, opening up that massive window for intervention.
But the diagnostic innovations don't stop at blood tests. The sources outline developments that sound entirely futuristic, specifically the intersection of artificial intelligence and speech analysis.
Oh, the application of machine learning to neurology is exploding. One NIH-funded study utilized advanced AI to analyze standard electronic health records.
So like the mundane notes your primary care doctor types into the computer.
Exactly. Your vital signs, routine prescriptions, seemingly unrelated minor ailments. The AI algorithms, capable of analyzing millions of data points simultaneously, were able to predict an Alzheimer's diagnosis up to 7 years before clinical symptoms emerged, with 86% accuracy.
7 years before? How?
The machine learning spotted incredibly subtle hidden patterns that human doctors naturally miss. Like, for instance, they found a strong predictive link between the onset of osteoporosis in women and subsequent dementia risk.
And the research regarding speech analysis is even more staggering. I read that a smartphone could potentially diagnose you just by listening to you talk.
The science of acoustic and linguistic biomarkers is fascinating. Researchers recorded older adults responding to a simple storytelling task, like describing a picture. They fed the audio recordings into AI systems.
And the AI just listened to the words.
More than the words. The systems didn't just listen to the words. They analyzed the microscopic acoustic features of the speech. They found that highly subtle changes, specifically speaking just fractions of a second slower, taking longer and more frequent micropauses to search for a word, and beginning to use vague pronouns like it or thing instead of specific nouns.
Wow, those tiny changes correlated to Alzheimer's.
They correlated perfectly with the early buildup of tau protein in the brain revealed on PET scans. We are rapidly approaching a reality where a simple voice analysis app on your smartphone analyzing a 3-minute conversation could accurately flag the earliest stages of cognitive decline.
But we also have to account for the reality of the American healthcare system. I mean, AI is amazing, but most people interact with a stressed, overworked primary care physician who has exactly 15 minutes to see them. How do we deploy better detection in a busy clinic?
That is where the 5-cog test is proving revolutionary. Historically, cognitive tests given in clinics like the MMSE were heavily biased.
Highest how?
They relied heavily on a patient's educational background, literacy level, and specific cultural knowledge. If English wasn't your first language or you didn't have a college degree, the test might falsely indicate dementia.
That's a huge problem.
It was. The 5-cog test is a brilliantly simple 5-minute assessment designed to be administered by a medical assistant right in the exam room. Critically, it is entirely culturally and educationally unbiased. It uses universally understood symbols and image-matching tasks that bypass literacy requirements.
And the clinical data on its effectiveness.
The data shows that implementing the simple 5-minute, unbiased test in primary care settings tripled the odds that a patient with early cognitive issues would be correctly flagged and receive proper, specialized follow-up dementia care within 90 days.
Tripled the odds. It is closing the massive gap in early detection.
It really is.
Okay, so the diagnostic net is wider, faster, cheaper, and more accurate than ever in human history. But identifying a disease early is only a victory if you have a therapeutic pipeline waiting to attack it. If we detect the amyloid trigger and the tau bullet early, what weapons do the doctors actually have to fight back?
The therapeutic pipeline is a source of immense optimism. As of the end of fiscal year 2024, the NIH was actively funding 495 distinct clinical trials for Alzheimer's and related dementias.
495.
That represents an unprecedented global army of scientific resources focused on this single problem.
Now, The treatments dominating the headlines, the ones making national news, are the anti-amyloid immunotherapies, drugs with names like lecanemab and donanemab. How do these actually work in the brain?
These are a class of drugs called monoclonal antibodies. They are administered via intravenous infusion. Mechanically, they are remarkable.
What do they do?
They are engineered antibodies that cross the blood-brain barrier, hunt down, and physically bind to the sticky beta-amyloid plaques, the triggers that have accumulated between the neurons.
So they attach to the plaque. Then what?
Once the drug binds to the plaque, it acts like a flare gun, signaling the patient's own immune system, specifically the microglia cells, to rush in and consume and clear the plaques away.
So they literally wash the trigger out of the brain.
Yes. In rigorous, large-scale clinical trials, these drugs prove that they profoundly clear the physical amyloid plaques from the brain tissue. And crucially, for patients who are in the very early, mild stages of the disease, clearing the plaques translated to a statistically significant slowing of their cognitive and functional decline.
It is vital to manage expectations here, though. These drugs are an incredible breakthrough, but they are not a cure. If a neuron has already died, the drug does not bring it back to life. They do not reverse the memory loss that has already occurred.
That is a critical distinction. They do not reverse the damage. What they do is buy time. They hit the brakes on the biological process, allowing patients to maintain their independence, recognize their family members, and engage in daily life for a significantly longer period than they would without treatment.
But the research is rapidly expanding beyond just targeting the amyloid trigger. Because as we established, amyloid is only the first step. The NIH report details a massive array of novel targets. I was particularly drawn to a small molecule drug currently in trials called CT-812.
Yeah, CT-1812 represents a brilliant alternative strategy. Instead of just trying to wash away the toxic proteins, CT-1812 acts as a defensive shield for the brain's communication networks.
How does it shield them?
Between every neuron is a tiny gap called a synapse where the chemical signals cross. The toxic amyloid oligomers actively seek out and bind to specific receptors, called sigma-2 receptors, on these synapses, destroying the connection.
Okay.
CT-1812 is designed to flood the brain and aggressively bind to those exact same sigma-2 receptors first, literally displacing the toxic amyloid and blocking it from attaching.
Like musical chairs and the drug took all the seats.
Precisely. It protects the physical synapses from being destroyed, even if the toxic proteins are present in the environment. It is currently in phase 2 clinical trials and is showing immense promise not just for Alzheimer's, but for related neurodegenerative conditions like Lewy body dementia.
And the final piece of the treatment pipeline that I found fascinating is the strategy of repurposing existing drugs. Because the logic is so sound, if a drug has already spent a decade passing FDA safety trials for one disease, why not see if it impacts the biology of the brain?
Repurposing is the fastest way to get treatments to patients. Researchers are looking closely at diabetes medications, given the strong link between insulin resistance and brain health. But the most intriguing study involves an anti-epilepsy drug called levetiracetam.
Why an epilepsy drug for memory loss?
In the early stages of Alzheimer's, before the cells die, the toxic amyloid actually causes the neurons in the hippocampus to become hyperexcitable. They fire frantically and erratically, exhausting themselves and accelerating their own destruction.
The burnout.
Exactly. Epilepsy drugs are specifically designed to calm hyperactive electrical storms in the brain. Researchers gave a very low daily dose of levetiracetam to patients diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment.
Did it stop the decline?
The results were incredibly nuanced and point directly to the future of treatment. It didn't work for everyone, but they discovered that it significantly slowed brain shrinkage, the actual physical atrophy of the hippocampus, specifically in the subgroup of patients who did not carry the APOE4 genetic risk variant.
That is the ultimate definition of precision medicine. The future of cognitive care is not going to be a single, universal miracle pill.
Exactly. The future is highly tailored. A patient will get the highly accurate blood test. The doctor will sequence their specific genetic profile, analyze their unique biomarkers, and say, okay, based on your specific biology, you don't need the amyloid clearer, you need the synapse shield combined with the low-dose epilepsy drug to calm the network.
We are entering an era of bespoke neurological intervention.
We truly are.
We have covered an absolute mountain of scientific terrain today. From the microscopic twisting of tau proteins to the grand structural changes of the sprint mind and pointer trials. I want to take a breath and synthesize this massive toolkit. Because the goal of this deep dive is not to leave you, the listener, overwhelmed by biochemistry. The goal is to leave you equipped, Let's summarize exactly what you can control.
The core takeaways form a concrete daily action plan. First, you must aggressively manage the biological environment of your brain through the mind diet. You are deliberately choosing foods, leafy greens, blueberries, extra virgin olive oil, that deliver chemical fire extinguishers to your neurons to fight oxidative stress and inflammation.
While strictly limiting the saturated fats that break down your blood-brain barrier.
Exactly.
Second, you must protect the physical plumbing. You need to know your systolic blood pressure, and you need to work relentlessly with your doctor through the DHH diet and medication if necessary to keep that top number strictly below 120. You must turn the violent pressure washer back into a gentle hose to protect your white matter cables.
Third, you must protect your sensory processing power. If you're struggling to follow conversations in noisy environments, you must check your ego, go to an audiologist, and utilize hearing aids. You must stop forcing your brain to steal processing power from your memory centers just to decode static.
Fourth, you have to move your body and challenge your mind simultaneously. You need sustained aerobic exercise to pump oxygen to the hippocampus and release the BDNF miracle grow.
And you need to utilize that primed brain state by learning genuinely complex, frustrating new skills. A language, an instrument, a dance, to force millions of neurons to wire together and build cognitive reserve. Throw away the junk food phone apps.
And finally, you must view social connection and stress management as critical medical interventions. You must actively combat loneliness to shut off the chronic flow of cortisol that actively shrinks your memory centers.
The ultimate overriding message of the global scientific community is this: you are not a passive, helpless victim waiting to see if your genetics pull the trigger.
Your family history is an important piece of data, but it is not a crystal ball. You are an active, powerful participant in the construction of your own cognitive longevity.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final profound concept drawn from the absolute edges of the current research. It is an idea that I believe completely reframes how we perceive aging and disease. It is the medical concept of cognitive resilience.
What exactly does cognitive resilience look like under a microscope?
We discussed earlier that there are women who carry the dreaded APOE4 risk gene, the highest known genetic risk factor, yet they live their entire lives and never develop clinical dementia.
Right, the 40% who escape it.
When NIH researchers looked deeply at the blood plasma of these specific resilient women, they discovered something astonishing. These women possessed highly unique immune system proteins, specifically one called PTX3, that women who succumbed to the disease entirely lacked.
Their immune systems were fundamentally different. Their bodies were quietly fighting a microscopic war, and they were winning.
Yes. But the concept goes even deeper than unique proteins. It is a well-documented, highly studied phenomenon in pathology that medical examiners frequently perform autopsies on individuals who died in their late 90s with perfectly sharp, entirely intact memories.
Like, they recognize their grandchildren, they manage their finances, they are entirely themselves until the day they die.
Exactly. Yet when the pathologists slice into their brains, they discovered that the tissue is absolutely riddled with the toxic amyloid plaques and tau tangles of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
The physical pathology is severe.
Let me make sure I'm understanding the gravity of that. Their brains contained the physical, biological disease, but they exhibited zero cognitive symptoms of it.
Exactly. The pathology report says severe Alzheimer's disease, but the lived reality of the human being was perfect cognitive health. The disease was present, but the dementia was not. And this reality raises an incredibly provocative, ultimately hopeful question that drives the future of this science. What if the ultimate goal of all of this effort, the strict mind diet, the rigorous blood pressure control, the aerobic running, the hearing aids, the salsa dancing, the social connection, what if the goal isn't necessarily to achieve the impossible task of stopping the biological aging of the brain entirely?
If we can't stop the trigger from forming, then what are we actually doing with all these interventions?
What if the goal of the toolkit is to build a brain that is so incredibly dense with complex neural connections, so structurally robust from years of neuroplasticity, and supported by an immune system so perfectly regulated by diet and reduced stress that the physical disease can exist inside your head, but it can never actually touch you?
That is, yeah.
You spend decades building a cognitive fortress with such thick walls and so many redundant pathways that even if the enemy breaches the outer courtyard, they can never ever take the castle. You live your entire, beautiful life sharp and present, completely outrunning the symptoms, regardless of what the biological pathology report says after you were gone.
That is a staggering, beautiful thought. You don't have to cure the disease, you just have to out-engineer it. You build a brain so vast and resilient that a few broken tracks don't stop the train.
Precisely.
So think back to that moment we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. You are standing in the middle of the kitchen, you cannot find your car keys, and that cold, terrifying flash of panic hits you. Is this the end? The next time that happens, I want you to stop. Take a deep breath.
Because a misplaced key is usually nothing more than a misplaced key. You were probably just distracted by your phone when you set it down.
Right. But let that tiny electric spike of fear serve a purpose. Let it be a catalyst.
Let it be the immediate prompt that makes you take control of your biology.
Exactly. Thank you for spending this time with us on this deep dive. Our challenge to you today is remarkably simple. Do not attempt to change your entire life by tomorrow morning. That is a recipe for failure. Instead, look at the toolkit we built today. Pick one single, small, highly actionable step and execute it today.
Add a large handful of blueberries to your breakfast tomorrow.
Go for a brisk, heart-pumping 20-minute walk after dinner tonight. Schedule an appointment to get your blood pressure accurately checked. Or simply pick up the phone and call a friend you haven't spoken to in 6 months to strengthen that vital social network.
Take one small step today to start building your fortress.
Start building your resilience. Your brain is listening to every choice you make.